health experts are warning that in the shadow of the coronavirus, another crisis is about to emerge, a historic wave of mental health problems like depression, substance abuse, post-traumatic stress disorder, and, suicide. Today, we speak with our recurring guest, mental health counselor and hypnotherapist, Harriet Fraad, to understand more about what we are, about to see and what our mental health care systems need to be able to give to people that they, how do we give them the care that they need? Again, Harriet Fraad is a mental health counselor and hypnotherapist in practice in New York City. She's a founding member of the Second-Wave Feminist Movement. Harriet specializes in speaking and writing about topics in which psychology and economics overlaps. Harriet, thanks for joining us on the program.
Very glad to be here.
Oh, well, that, the Washington Post put out a piece recently saying that, there's likely to be a wave of mental health problems. Can you talk about how a pandemic like the coronavirus can impact a person's mental health? What does this look like on the macro level when so much of the population is dealing with this kind of distress?
Well, on the macro level, it looks like people understand in the United States, and that's why the United States has more of this than anyone else in the developed world that's measured. What happens is that people feel that they are in danger because they actually are. That's not an irrational feeling. And they also feel that they are in the hands of someone for whom they're irrelevant. And many people go back to a frightened childhood in which they're kind of walk-ons in their parents' psychodrama, and their parents are so absorbed in their own lives they can't see this is a little human and try to get to know and care for that person. And our leadership is oblivious to what is crucial to the life of people. For someone who claims that he's pro-life, that's a bizarre idea because he's anti-life.
He's pro-birth, but anti-life.
Exactly.
Mm.
So he could, and pro-pregnancy and entrapment for women and the denial of choices, pro-women as incubators, the end. But what we have here is people are frightened and not for nothing. And they're frightened on two levels. One is that they're alone with death approaching and surrounding them. That's true. The second thing is that their finances, which were precarious and dangerous for the mass of people, we can't forget that 60% of Americans didn't have $400 in case of a dire emergency. So we have people who before didn't have $400 and lived paycheck to paycheck, not getting a paycheck. And they might be the 6.6 million people who are unemployed every day, trying to get through on unemployment to unemployment, but unemployment hasn't employed the unemployed to pick up those lines and process those claims. So they wait for weeks. And so that their livelihood is both threatened by an impending viral contagion and also by their financial desperation. In times of unemployment, three things go up markedly, which are indicators of mental health decline. One is child abuse. With every increase in unemployment, child abuse goes up 30%. There's 30% more babies in the emergency room who have been shaken so violently that their brains turn to jelly.
Yikes.
There's also more wife abuse, and particularly now as women are trapped at home and men feel powerless and often want to empower themselves by controlling other people and who's around but their wife and kids, and so that they resort to violence to vent their frustrations. They also, those who drink as a disinhibition for beating people up, can't go to the bar.
Right.
They get takeout and drink at home and beat people up.
Wow.
So we have a 30% increase in child abuse, about a 30%, little more, of wife abuse or partner abuse. And we have a 33% increase in suicide.
Oof.
The United States was an outlier in suicide anyway, because it's hope and connection that give you a reason to live.
Harriet, none of this is being reported anywhere. I mean, I see in New York, we have on New York One, the local channel, there's commercials, there's the occasional report that domestic abuse is going up, almost like a public service announcement that if you need help, call this number, etc. But I'm not seeing this reported anywhere. In fact, I'm not seeing, I mean, why are we not seeing the reports of the dead people's faces like you would if there was a school shooting for COVID? Why are we, everything in this pandemic is dehumanized but in the media? Have you noticed this?
I have, and I've noticed that there's very little mention of psychological suffering. We should say that wherever there's inequality, and the United States is the most unequal of the whole 30 more developed nations in the world, wherever there's that much inequality, there's also more suicide, abuse, and so on. But now that's even more true. And inequality, of course, is more true. It
We have
isn't
a
much emphasized that the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration hotline has had an 1,000% increase in calls to the hotline this month. So that we do have a mental health crisis, and people who are despairing are not irrational. There's a lot of
yeah, exactly. It's almost like if you're not despairing or depressed, you really are out to lunch. It's not just the pandemic, it's the economic problems that we're going to be facing. It's the enormous fear of economic, the economy's falling apart, the environment falling apart. Now that if you're really paying attention, you see that Trump is rolling back environmental protections. So it's almost, what do you suggest for people to stay sane and, or, to stay sane and stay alert to what's happening in the world? How do you suggest people balance those two needs?
Well, the key to mental health is connection. That's one of with other humans. That's one of the reasons that the United States is very low on the happiness index that is run by the UN, the 2019 happiness index of the nations of the world. Out of the 30 more developed nations, the United States is 19th. Not good for the most wealthy nation in the world. In any case, connection. Mental health is like a table with 4 legs. One sturdy leg that holds it up is intimate connection. Connection with people you're really close to. It could be a partner. It could be a relative. It could be a deep friend. It could be a child, but deep emotional connection with another person. Another is a wider group of connections, which are atrophied now in the shelter in place. And those are groups that you might join, whether it's the PTA or the Socialist Party. It's a group with whom you have a common purpose.
That's so right, Harriet. I didn't realize how important that was. And that's really something that has fallen away. When you have an intimate connection, you're having, you're calling, you have a phone call with that particular person. But when you have this sort of like the PTA group, I went online to Living Liberally, which is a group I've been involved in from across the country. And they were just together, everyone having a drink, talking politics, and it was just wonderful. I mean, there was 25 squares, people coming from all over the country, and they were telling you about what it is like to live in Texas right now. And it was this casual conversation with basically strangers, but together for a common purpose. And I have to say, it was probably the best thing, one of the best things I've done in weeks. It was great.
A third thing is even more casual social connection. That too is decimated, which is talking to the people on the line at the supermarket, talking to people that you see in the street, having fun conversations around whatever, and particularly in New York City, where you can start talking to anyone and
it's the whole reason we live here. It's the whole reason you live here. Casual intimacy.
It's totally sustaining, and it's gone because people see each other as objects of contagion as they wear their masks and their gloves and stay away from each other for their survival. So that's shot. And another one,
Harriet, actually, before we get to the fourth leg, just to put a personal spin on it, my daughter, who's 4 years old, is a very gregarious child. When we go out, she talks to everyone, etc. And now she is afraid to talk to anyone. And I fear for her, this having a lifelong effect on her, but also it puts a lot of pressure on me to be the one person, her mom, that she trusts and loves and get all her needs met from. And oh my God, Harriet, it is a lot of pressure to
mothers have to tutor as well. And
yeah.
don't have, while we're on that, I should mention before we get to the fourth sturdy leg, which is that, of course, just as all these unemployed teachers now who are laid off right now or temporarily suspended could be on Zoom networks and Google chats and Skypes with their children in their classes and in small groups or individually tutoring them, talking to them, helping them, rather than putting the burden on mothers, many of whom don't even have a computer to do this, and others who are exhausted, and others who don't speak the language, and so on. You could be employing teachers who are currently teachers, teachers who are retired teachers, to help the children through. And in the same way, you could be employing masses of therapists to have small groups around different issues, to have larger groups, to have individual sessions to help people sustain some kind of hope and belief in life in this assault against us. But those things aren't done. They would be part of a modern FDR like program, because in the last Great Depression, FDR decided, because of the hundreds of thousands of unemployed demonstrating in the streets and the farmers who hung judges who condemned family farms to bankruptcy and so on, that he decided, okay, if the private sector won't do something, I will. And he hired 11 million people, which would be in our population density now as if the Trump government hired 22 million people to do the things we need to build proper mass transit systems. We're the only developed country without fast train service, to build rapid train service, which China has 12 rapid train services, across their country. And so does every other developed nation. We could be developing all sorts of programs that are needed. Trolleys to get people from place to place, solar and wind systems, but they're not doing that.
I mean, they don't even, the idea, people put off, they're like, well, maybe we can do that when we come out of isolation. But that, first of all, that's not going to happen. And second of all, you could do large scale mental health work on the internet if you put, if you put people to work.
That's right. And you can, just like you could put tutoring services there for the children who are home and whose parents are already horribly stressed or couldn't do it. And there are so many things you could do if you think not only of how can my friends make a profit and then return it with election donations, but how can we resolve this crisis? That is why the United States is the worst in the developed world. Now on to the fourth leg of a sturdy mental health table. Now we already have two legs that are very shaky. Here's a fourth leg that can hold up. So we'd have three, we would have at least a few legs of the table that was operating. And that is connection to the wider world, looking at this virus and knowing that it can be resolved because every other nation that's a developed nation is resolving it. The group of 12 that were one of the first with the worst cases, even Italy that had the worst in Europe, is now opening up again because they demanded that everyone shelter in place. They tested everyone, they tracked where they were, and they treated them. The United States has tested 2% of our population. And the reason is that our president doesn't want people to know how widespread COVID is, so people will die. He said, okay, 100,000 is an acceptable death, as long as he's not one of them. because he gets tested several times a day.
Does he?
Yes, he
I
said
did
so.
not know that.
He said so. And so does Pence. But that,
Yeah, well, who knows what that's true or not. If that the truth value of words that come out of his mouth
that's
are
true. And they offered that constant testing or several times a day to Congress that turned it down and said that's not fair when the mass of people is not being tested at all. So the other is a connection to the world, to look at what other people are doing, to get hope from it, that all these other countries, whether they're the Scandinavian countries or Germany or South Korea or New Zealand or whatever, don't have any cases anymore because they took care of it early and strongly. China took care of it, has no more cases. And it's not, sometimes if you compare it to New Zealand, okay, people say that's because New Zealand has 11 million people. No, I think it has 9 million people. Well, China has over a billion, 1 point something billion, and they've taken care of it.
Harriet, we have I don't want to cut you off mid thought, but we have a number of questions coming in the stream. And is it okay if I pepper you with our stream questions?
Great.
Okay, so from our friend Toilet Lurker, who I've told him to get a new name, but somehow he's stuck with the Toilet Lurker. His question, and I believe it's a guy, his question is, I love isolation and hate work. After the lockdown is over, how can I deal with the dehumanizing, coercive, and soul-destroying activity known as employment?
Well, of course, it depends on employment, and the way I can imagine you might deal with it is talking to your sister and fellow workers about uniting in a way that could humanize your job. Unionization has been spurred by this virus because people realize their employers just want them to make money. And our government has mandated that some people go back to work, but it hasn't mandated that their employers clean up the place, sanitize the place, and protect them, like the meat packers, so that they're basically doing the same thing as a holdup person. Your money or your life, those are the choices. But if people join together, they can make changes like the Amazon workers did with their walkouts. And like so many are doing, like the nurses have done, to demand protective equipment, like the flight attendants have done, demanding that the whole plane has to be disinfected if a person has been found to have COVID on it.
Even the Amazon workers are starting to.
They are.
Yeah.
They are.
What a great answer to that question. And I think one of the takeaways, Harriet, from speaking with you is always, connection, connection, connection.
Yes.
And that's what heals. That's what heals. So another question coming in from the chat, Dr. Gwyn says, what does feminist ethics and an ethics of care have to teach us about living through a pandemic? And moreover, how do we counter the constant attempts to reduce everything to a cost-benefit analysis as if humans were beings to be counted on a spreadsheet?
That's a wonderful, wonderful question. Part of it is the value. You have to choose the ideology that you want to have in your government. What values? Whether you value profit for the people who have the money to pay you for your campaign, or whether you value life. If you value life, if you actually believe in the right to life, then you would believe in caring labor, and you'd show it in our monetary society by paying it. Currently, daycare workers get less than parking lot attendants in pay. You would have to change the pay scale, have it be something like France's pay scale for their universal, wonderful childcare centers, which is the same as teachers, as any other teachers, with the same requirements. And in every daycare there, they have a master's degree teacher and an associate's degree teacher. And they also have a pediatric nurse because they have a sick room. If you're sick, they'll take care of you. Unless it's terribly contagious, they'll take care of you while your parents have to work. So that really what you'd have to do is say, what are our values? What is essential? And what's essential is life, not profit. The stock market is not essential.
Even Cuomo was saying that he was saying in his press conference, the disease is death. When they said, well, maybe the cure could be worse than the disease, and he's like, the disease is death. It's death. So it was kind of nice to hear a political, or an elected official, a fan or not a fan of Cuomo. He's not everyone's favorite, no matter where you are. To actually humanize the issue.
Absolutely. And you have to put your money where your mouth is in this capitalist system. So you have to now look at those people who are nurturing our lives. Look at the delivery people. Look at the grocery workers. Look at the nurses and the orderlies and the nurses' aides and the janitors who are cleaning up our public spaces, and the sanitation workers and the childcare workers and the early childhood and teachers and the mothers and fathers. You would have to look at, how do we support these people who create and support life, rather than our armaments manufacturers who get $1 trillion and even more. Trump's very generous with them when they sustain death. Now, there's a certain amount we need to protect our nation, but we have 7 times more destructive equipment than the next 7 to 10 nations that are also heavily equipped. What is this? It's profit. It's cost plus contracts for military producers. That's a misallocation according to our values, so that we have to decide, what values do we have? And if we value life, we have to reward the people who sustain life. And we couldn't send workers into their death, or their potential death, as in the meat packers, without paying and rewarding the sanitation of the meat packing plants, and not having people stand shoulder to shoulder in an environment in which there's contamination. You would have constant sanitation and protection, which you don't have. So if you...
They just started closing the subways here in New York City from 1 a.m. to 5 a.m. to disinfect them all. I'm like, every night, I'm thinking, can't we create jobs by doing this all the time? Maybe you don't have to close them all the way at that hour, because people still need to travel. At least they did. But sanitizing the subway seems like a good idea when there's not a pandemic.
Of course, and constantly doing it. 41 transit workers have been killed by the COVID virus because they're in those crowded subways or in those small containers all day. You would need constant sanitation, and you could hire the hundreds of thousands of unemployed to do that, but they do it at night because they don't want to hire anyone else. It's a misallocation of our funds.
Oh, well, we have other questions coming in. We have just a few more minutes. We're speaking with Harriet Fraad, hypnotherapist, therapist, and feminist in practice in New York. But also, don't forget that she is the host of the podcast Capitalism Hits Home. Harriet, you said to me recently that you're also just started hosting something called It's Not All in Your Mind. Can you talk about that?
Yes, it's a podcast.
What a great title, great title.
With Max Golding, called It's Not All in Your Head, because it's about where anxiety and fear mesh with the economic and social system. It isn't all in our heads. It's, each of us is an individual that interacts differently with the political economy around us. However, the psych community has discounted the effects of our context in which we live. And so we counteract that. And it's not.
Harriet, this is, I tell you, and I think I've said this before, but every time I walk away from an interview or a personal conversation with you, I realize what section, how much I thought that it was all me, and how much I realized that actually the system under which we live has a great effect. And so to not take everything personally, and to recognize that I am a part of a system and it's not just me, is great. So you're doing a huge service for people. Where can folks find that it's new? It's just brand new, right?
Just put on the internet, Harriet Fraad, Fraad, Max Golding, Golding. It's not just in your head, and you'll get it.
Well, we have a number of, there was another question, but I have to go because our next guest is coming on. So I know you're here with us every 2 weeks, and hopefully we can hold this question for the next week. But I do want to say that in the stream chat, it's, people are saying the things that you may have heard before, but I don't think we should not say them again. Can you adopt me as an aunt? Things, these are the things, the woman or the doctor whose question you answered, is thanking you for the answer. There's a lot of hearts coming up on the thing, so thank you so much for being here with us today. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, and if people want to really get in touch with me, hfraad@gmail.com. And, a lot of people say, could you be my mother? And
She
failing that,
did say that too, but I didn't.
how about this and that? So, I like to connect with people. It's my life's blood as well as all of ours.
Oh, Harriet, it's so wonderful to see you. I'm looking forward to our next conversation. So
Me
thank you so
too.
much.
Thank
Appreciate it.
you.
And stay well.
You too. Stay healthy and strong.